The Ford dealership in Dallas buzzed with the low hum of activity. Bright fluorescent lights glinted off rows of pristinely polished vehicles, their sleek designs and bold grilles exuding strength and sophistication. The air smelled faintly of new leather and engine oil, while the soft whir of air conditioning added a sterile hum to the showroom's atmosphere. A handful of customers milled about, their eyes gleaming with admiration as they examined the latest Ford models. Sales consultants stood nearby, their grins polished and rehearsed, ready to pounce on anyone who looked remotely interested. Through the glass double doors walked Henry Clayton, his entrance unassuming and quiet. At 72, Henry carried the weight of his years in his stooped shoulders and the weathered lines etched into his face. He wore a woolen coat, its hem slightly frayed, and his faded dress shirt was tucked into trousers that had seen better days. A simple black cane supported his careful steps, and his scuffed leather shoes squeaked faintly against the tiled floor. To the bustling showroom, he looked like any other retiree, perhaps an old rancher or a man scraping by on a modest pension. Henry's pale blue eyes scanned the showroom with quiet interest as he approached a gleaming Ford F-150 Platinum on display. The truck was a vision of power and refinement, its bold chrome accents catching the light as its robust frame promised durability and luxury. A small plaque beside it read $70,000. "Excuse me," Henry said softly, his voice slightly hoarse from age but steady. He directed his question to a nearby salesman, a tall man in his mid-30s with sharp features and an air of polished arrogance. His name tag read Kevin Marshall. Kevin turned to Henry, his practiced smile faltering for a moment as he took in the older man's appearance. He masked it quickly, but the slight curl of disdain at the corner of his mouth was unmistakable. "Yes? Can I help you?" he asked, the cheer in his voice barely concealing his condescension. Henry gestured toward the F-150 Platinum. "I'd like to take a closer look at this truck. Could you show it to me?" Kevin's eyebrows raised slightly, and he let out a short, incredulous laugh. "This one?" he asked, placing a hand on the truck's polished hood. "The platinum trim? It starts at 70 grand, sir. Are you sure you don't want to take a look at something a bit more affordable?" Henry's expression remained calm, unfazed by Kevin's tone. "No, I'm quite certain. I'd like to see this one." Kevin's smile thinned, and he glanced over his shoulder toward the reception desk, where another employee, a young woman named Lisa, smirked as she watched the exchange. Kevin turned back to Henry, crossing his arms. "Look, sir, I don't mean to waste your time or mine. This truck isn't exactly within reach for most people. Maybe you should try one of the used models out back. Or better yet, there's a second-hand dealership just down the road." Henry paused, his grip tightening slightly on his cane. For a fleeting moment, a flicker of disappointment passed through his eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. He nodded slowly. "I see. Well, thank you for your time." He turned and began to walk toward the exit, his measured steps echoing softly across the tiled floor. Kevin watched him go, shaking his head with a smirk before turning to Lisa and Tim, the dealership security guard, who had been observing the scene from a distance. "You see that?" Kevin said, his voice low but dripping with amusement. "What kind of guy walks in here dressed like that and thinks he's buying a $70,000 truck? Unreal." Lisa chuckled, flipping through a clipboard of documents. "Maybe he thought this was a charity. Poor guy probably doesn't even know what a platinum trim is." Tim, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, let out a short laugh. "You handled that well, Kevin. Don't waste time on people who aren't serious buyers." Kevin grinned, leaning casually against the F-150. "Exactly. Gotta save my energy for the real customers, the ones who actually have money to spend." As Henry pushed open the glass doors and stepped outside, the crisp Texas air filled his lungs. He adjusted his coat collar and glanced back at the dealership's sleek facade. His expression remained serene, but deep within, a spark of quiet resolve ignited. The hum of laughter from inside the showroom barely reached his ears as he walked toward his car, an older but impeccably maintained sedan parked at the edge of the lot. As he opened the door and settled into the driver's seat, Henry let out a small sigh, his fingers drumming lightly against the steering wheel. "Let them laugh," he murmured to himself, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "They'll learn soon enough." With that, Henry started the engine and pulled out of the lot, leaving the dealership and its dismissive staff behind. But for all their condescension, none of them could have predicted what the next day would bring. Inside the Ford dealership, Kevin Marshall leaned casually against the hood of the shiny Ford F-150 Platinum, his grin wide with smug satisfaction. Lisa, the sales consultant, walked over with a clipboard in hand, raising an eyebrow. Tim, the security guard, remained stationed by the wall, arms crossed, watching the exchange with faint amusement. "Seriously, Kevin," Lisa began with a chuckle. "Did that guy really think he could afford this truck? He looked like he just wandered out of a thrift store." Kevin laughed, shaking his head. "You should have seen him. Wanted me to give him the tour. Probably thought we were running some kind of open house for tourists. Guys walking around in 50-year-old boots, asking about $70,000 trucks. Unreal." Lisa snorted, flipping through her clipboard. "I mean, come on. You can't blame the guy for dreaming big, but maybe he should start at the used car lot." Tim chimed in from his spot by the wall. "You handled it perfectly, Kevin. Don't waste time on people who clearly aren't serious buyers." Kevin spread his arms wide, as if he were basking in approval. "Exactly. This isn't a charity. We're here to sell trucks, not give tours to retirees who think they can splurge their Social Security check." Lisa glanced out the glass doors where the old man had disappeared minutes earlier. "He didn't even argue with you," she remarked. "Just nodded and walked out. That's unusual." Kevin shrugged. "What's he gonna say? I'm really a secret millionaire and I'm going to teach you a lesson? Please, these types just can't admit when they're out of their league." Tim chuckled, pushing off the wall to join the conversation. "Maybe he'll think twice before walking into a place like this again." The three of them laughed, the sound carrying across the showroom, as the hum of the air conditioning filled the gaps between their words. Around them, the dealership bustled with activity, other salespeople attending to customers who looked more appropriate, sharply dressed professionals, couples eager to upgrade their vehicles, and families carefully inspecting SUVs. "Back to work, people," Kevin finally said, clapping his hands together. "We've got real customers to impress." Lisa rolled her eyes playfully and walked off toward a young couple eyeing an Explorer. Tim returned to his post near the entrance, but Kevin lingered for a moment longer, glancing back at the F-150 Platinum. His reflection stared back at him from the truck's polished chrome, the smirk on his face underscoring his confidence. "Old man probably couldn't even spell F-150, Kevin muttered to himself, laughing under his breath as he walked away. Meanwhile, Henry Clayton sat in the driver's seat of his sedan, parked at the edge of a quiet lot downtown. His hands rested on the steering wheel, his pale blue eyes staring out at the city skyline. He wasn't angry. He seldom allowed himself the indulgence of anger. He was, however, reflective. Their laughter, their dismissiveness. It wasn't new to him. Henry had spent a lifetime seeing people underestimate him. As a young man, his modest upbringing and quiet demeanor had often led others to believe he lacked ambition. That was, of course, before he built an empire in the oil industry, before the quiet boy from a small town in Texas had turned out to be one of the shrewdest business minds of his generation. But wealth hadn't changed Henry. He still preferred simple pleasures. A good book, a quiet drive, a cup of coffee at a local diner. His fortune, staggering as it was, remained largely a secret. He had no interest in flaunting his wealth or seeking recognition. Still, moments like these reminded him of the way the world worked, of how quickly people judged others based on appearances. Henry reached for his phone, the screen lighting up with a single touch. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for. After a brief pause, he pressed call. "Mr. Clayton," a confident voice answered on the other end. "What can I do for you?" Henry smiled faintly. "James, I need you to look into something for me. There's a Ford dealership here in Dallas. I'd like to discuss acquiring it." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line before James replied, his tone both curious and professional. Of course, sir. I'll get started on the paperwork immediately. Should I assume this is personal? Henry's smile grew slightly. Let's just say it's an investment with a lesson attached. Understood, sir. I'll be in touch soon. As Henry ended the call, he leaned back in his seat, his expression calm but determined. Tomorrow, he thought, would be a day to remember. Not just for him, but for the staff at the dealership who had been so quick to dismiss him. Adjusting his coat, Henry started the engine and pulled out onto the street, the faint hum of his car blending with the city's noises. For now, he would wait, content in the knowledge that some lessons were best learned the hard way. The following morning, the Ford dealership in Dallas bustled with its usual activity. Sales consultants shuffled between customers, animated voices echoing off the gleaming showroom floor. Kevin Marshall, still riding on the high of what he considered a win yesterday, leaned back in his chair, relaying a boastful recount of the encounter with Henry Clayton to a couple of his colleagues. And then, I told him, Kevin said, his grin wide, why don't you check out the second-hand lot? You should have seen his face. The guy just nodded and walked out. Didn't even try to argue. Lisa chuckled, shaking her head. Poor old man. Honestly, you'd think someone his age would know better than to try his luck in a place like this. Well, Kevin smirked. At least he gave us something to laugh about. Tim, who had overheard the conversation from the entrance, chimed in with a laugh. Maybe we should add a dress code for customers. Must look like you can actually afford something. The three erupted in laughter, unaware of the looming revelation that would forever change their view of the quiet old man they so quickly dismissed. At precisely 10 a.m., the glass doors of the dealership swung open, but instead of a customer, a sharply dressed man in his late 30s walked in, his tailored suit and sleek leather briefcase giving him an air of authority. He carried himself with confidence as he approached the reception desk, his polished shoes clicking softly against the tile. Good morning, the man said, his voice calm yet commanding. I'm looking for the manager. Lisa, caught off guard by his presence, straightened up and gestured toward Kevin. That would be Kevin Marshall over there. Kevin, noticing the exchange, stood up and plastered on his most professional smile, extending a hand as the man approached. Good morning. Kevin Marshall, sales manager here. How can I help you? The man didn't return the handshake. Instead, he placed a sleek leather folder on the nearest desk and opened it, revealing a stack of official-looking documents. My name is James Lawson, and I represent Mr. Henry Clayton. He began, his tone steady and formal. I'm here to inform you that, as of 9 a.m. this morning, Mr. Clayton has acquired this dealership and all its assets through his investment firm. Kevin blinked, his confident demeanor faltering. Wait. What? What are you talking about? James adjusted his tie and slid the documents closer. Mr. Clayton is now the owner of this dealership. These are the legal transfer papers, duly signed and executed. If you'd like to verify their authenticity, I suggest consulting your corporate office. They've already been informed. Lisa, who had been listening from behind the reception desk, gasped audibly. Tim, standing near the entrance, shifted uncomfortably, his previous smugness replaced by unease. Kevin's face turned red, his confidence crumbling as he scanned the papers. This has to be a mistake. There's no way. There is no mistake, James interrupted smoothly. Mr. Clayton has made it clear that this acquisition was both a financial and a personal decision. Kevin stared at James, his mind racing. Personal decision? He echoed, his voice cracking slightly. Before James could respond, the sound of an engine roaring to life outside drew everyone's attention. Moments later, the glass doors slid open, and in walked Henry Clayton himself. But this time, he wasn't the unassuming old man they had dismissed the day before. Henry entered the dealership dressed impeccably in a tailored dark gray suit, his cane tapping lightly against the floor as he walked. Behind him, through the glass doors, the unmistakable shine of a brand-new Ford F-150 Platinum gleamed in the sunlight, a truck he had purchased from a different dealership. The room fell silent as Henry approached, his pale blue eyes calmly sweeping over the stunned faces of Kevin, Lisa, and Tim. He stopped in front of Kevin, his expression unreadable, before finally breaking the silence. "Good morning, Kevin," Henry said, his voice as calm and steady as ever. "It's a pleasure to see you again." Kevin opened his mouth to speak but found himself at a loss for words. Lisa and Tim exchanged nervous glances, the weight of realization settling heavily over them. Henry turned to James with a small nod. "Thank you, James. I'll take it from here." James stepped aside, allowing Henry to address the room. The older man's voice, though quiet, carried an authority that commanded attention. "I walked into this dealership yesterday as a customer," Henry began, his eyes briefly meeting Kevin's, "and I was met with judgment, condescension, and disrespect, all because of how I looked." Kevin's face turned pale, his earlier smugness replaced by a mix of embarrassment and fear. "I've spent my life building businesses, creating opportunities, and treating people with dignity," Henry continued. "I may not look like your average millionaire, but I've learned that appearances can be deceiving. Unfortunately, it seems not everyone here has learned that lesson." The silence in the room was deafening as Henry's words hung in the air. Kevin shifted uncomfortably, his confidence completely shattered. "We'll be discussing some changes around here," Henry concluded. "But for now, I'll leave you with this. Treat every customer with respect, no matter who they are or what they look like. You never know who might be standing in front of you." With that, Henry turned and walked toward his new F-150, the truck shining as brightly as the satisfied smile on his face. Henry Clayton stood in the center of the dealership, his quiet demeanor commanding attention far more effectively than any raised voice could have. The freshly minted owner of the business surveyed the faces of the staff surrounding him. Kevin, Lisa, and Tim all looked as though the ground beneath them had shifted. The air was thick with a mix of shock, discomfort, and unspoken questions. Henry took a moment to let the silence settle, his pale blue eyes meeting Kevin's directly. "Kevin," he began, his tone calm but resolute, "I'd like you to explain to me, why did you assume I wasn't a serious customer yesterday?" Kevin stammered, his confidence shattered. I didn't mean to, it's just that you didn't, look like." Henry raised a hand to stop him, his expression steady. "Didn't look like I could afford the truck?" he finished for him. Kevin's face flushed deeply, and he nodded hesitantly. Henry let out a small sigh, his gaze softening slightly but still firm. "Kevin, there's an important lesson you need to learn. In life, and especially in business, appearances can be deceiving. You judged me not by my words, not by my actions, but by the clothes I wore and the car I drove. Tell me, what would you have done differently if you had known I was a wealthy man?" Kevin blinked, unsure of how to respond. I would have treated you with more respect," he admitted quietly. Henry nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "And that, Kevin, is the problem. Respect should not be reserved for those you think can benefit you. It should be given freely to everyone, because you never know who you might be dealing with or what they might bring to the table." Lisa and Tim exchanged uneasy glances, clearly feeling the weight of Henry's words. The dealership's other staff, who had gathered nearby to witness the unexpected turn of events, murmured quietly among themselves. "I'm not here to humiliate you, Kevin," Henry continued, "but I am here to set a standard for how this business will be run moving forward. From this day on, every customer who walks through those doors will be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of how they look or what you think they can afford. Do I make myself clear?" Kevin nodded quickly, his voice trembling as he replied, "Yes, Mr. Clayton, I understand." Henry regarded him for a long moment before shifting his attention to the rest of the staff. "That goes for all of you," he said firmly, his voice carrying across the showroom. "If I see or hear of anyone being dismissed or disrespected the way I was yesterday, there will be consequences." The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Henry's gaze swept across the faces of the employees, lingering for just a moment on each of them. Finally, he turned back to Kevin. "Kevin," he said, his tone softening slightly, "I want to give you an opportunity to make this right. But first, I'd like you to step aside while I assess your position here." Kevin's face fell, and he opened his mouth to protest, but the words caught in his throat. Henry gestured toward James, who stepped forward and handed Kevin a formal letter. "You're on probation effective immediately," Henry said. "Use this time to reflect and to show that you understand the importance of treating others with respect." Kevin accepted the letter with trembling hands, his voice barely audible as he mumbled, "Yes, sir." Henry turned back to the group, his expression softening further. "Now," he said, "let's get back to work. This dealership has a lot of potential, and I intend to see it thrive. Together, we can make this place something we're all proud of." With that, Henry walked toward the gleaming F-150 Platinum he had parked just outside. As the staff began to disperse, Lisa and Tim exchanged glances once more, their earlier smugness replaced by quiet introspection. Henry opened the driver's side door of the truck and slid into the seat, his cane resting beside him. As he started the engine, the powerful hum of the vehicle filled the air, a testament to the craftsmanship he had always admired. For a moment, he sat there, gazing at the dealership through the windshield. This wasn't just about teaching a lesson, he thought to himself. It was about setting an example, about showing that kindness and respect were not just values to aspire to, but principles to live by. With a small nod to himself, Henry eased the truck into gear and pulled out of the lot. But this time, as he drove away, it wasn't with the quiet acceptance of being dismissed. It was with the satisfaction of knowing that change had begun, and that he had planted the seeds of a better future. The hum of activity in the dealership had slowed, but the atmosphere remained charged with whispers and tension. Employees who had been passive observers to the morning's events now gathered in small clusters, quietly discussing the unexpected turn of events. Their new owner was none other than the unassuming older man they had dismissed just a day earlier. Inside his temporary office, a spacious glass-walled room overlooking the showroom, Henry Clayton sat at the desk, the pile of managerial reports in front of him untouched. He wasn't focused on paperwork. Instead, he gazed out at the dealership floor, observing the staff. His years in the oil industry had taught him that a business's success depended not just on its products, but on the people who represented it. And today, he was about to make another critical decision. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Henry turned to see James, his trusted associate, standing in the doorway. "Mr. Clayton," James said, stepping inside. "Kevin is here to speak with you as requested." Henry nodded. "Thank you, James. Send him in." Moments later, Kevin Marshall entered, his usually confident stride replaced by hesitant, measured steps. His face was pale, his posture stiff, and he carried none of the arrogance that had defined his demeanor the previous day. "Mr. Clayton," he began, his voice subdued, "I just want to say how sorry I am for how I treated you. I was wrong, and I deeply regret my behavior." Henry gestured to the chair across from him. "Please, Kevin, have a seat." Kevin obeyed, his hands fidgeting nervously in his lap. He glanced at the paperwork on the desk but quickly looked away, unable to meet Henry's calm, piercing gaze. "You know, Kevin," Henry began, his voice calm but firm, "one of the most important lessons I've learned in life is that leadership isn't just about making deals or hitting sales targets. It's about setting an example, about treating others with respect, regardless of their background or appearance." Kevin nodded quickly. "I understand, sir, and I promise it won't happen again." Henry leaned back in his chair, studying Kevin carefully. "I appreciate your apology, Kevin, but actions speak louder than words. You see, the way you treated me yesterday wasn't just a lapse in judgment. It was a reflection of an attitude that has no place in a business like this." Kevin's throat tightened, and he swallowed hard. I understand." Henry folded his hands on the desk, his expression unyielding. "Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties as sales manager." While you may not have a future in leadership here, I will allow you to remain on staff as a sales consultant for now. Consider this your second chance, Kevin. Make the most of it. Kevin's eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, it seemed as though he might protest. But the weight of Henry's words, and the authority behind them, silenced him. He lowered his head, nodding reluctantly. Thank you for giving me another chance, Mr. Clayton. I won't let you down. Henry nodded. Good. Now, get back to the floor and do your best to earn the trust of our customers. And Kevin, remember, respect costs nothing, but it can make all the difference. As Kevin left the office, his steps uncertain, Henry turned his attention back to the showroom. He saw Lisa and Tim watching from a distance, their expressions a mix of curiosity and unease. Send Lisa in next, Henry said to James, who remained at the door. Minutes later, Lisa entered, her usual confidence replaced by a nervous humility. She stood in front of Henry's desk, her hands clasped in front of her. Lisa, Henry began, his tone slightly softer than it had been with Kevin. Do you understand why I called you here? Lisa nodded quickly. Yes, Mr. Clayton. I shouldn't have judged you or laughed at what happened yesterday. I was wrong, and I'm truly sorry. Henry regarded her for a moment before replying. I appreciate your apology, Lisa, but like Kevin, you need to understand that this isn't just about what you said yesterday. It's about the mindset behind it. If we're going to make this dealership a place where customers feel valued, we need to set the right tone. I'll do better, Lisa promised, her voice sincere. Henry nodded, his expression softening slightly. I believe you will. Consider this a warning. If I see or hear of anything similar happening again, there will be consequences. Do I make myself clear? Yes, sir, Lisa replied, relief washing over her. Good. You're dismissed. As Lisa left the office, Henry leaned back in his chair, letting out a quiet sigh. Running this dealership would be no easy task, but he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about trucks or sales, it was about building a culture of respect and integrity, one person at a time. He turned his gaze to the window, watching as Lisa and Kevin returned to the showroom floor, their demeanors noticeably more subdued. The staff murmured amongst themselves, the day's events sparking a mix of curiosity, caution, and newfound respect for their unassuming new boss. Henry allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. It wasn't just the trucks he intended to transform, it was the people who sold them. As the sun began to dip low over Dallas, its warm rays filtered through the windows of the Ford dealership, casting long shadows across the shiny showroom floor. Henry Clayton stood by the glass wall, his hands resting lightly on the polished surface of his cane. The past 2 days had been a whirlwind, yet here he was, a man of quiet determination surveying the business he now owned. The dealership, once filled with laughter tinged with arrogance, now buzzed with a cautious energy. Employees moved with more attentiveness, their conversations quieter and tinged with a newfound respect for their unassuming new boss. Kevin worked in silence, assisting a customer with genuine effort, while Lisa hovered nearby, her usually sharp demeanor replaced with a softer, humbler presence. Henry turned and walked slowly across the floor, his eyes drifting over the vehicles on display. The F-150 Platinum gleamed under the lights, a symbol of quality and craftsmanship that reminded him of the values he'd held onto throughout his life. Hard work, respect, and humility. James approached him with a clipboard in hand, his expression neutral but respectful. Mr. Clayton, everything is in place. The adjustments to staff roles are being implemented, and the corporate office has confirmed the ownership transition. Henry gave a small nod. Thank you, James. I trust you'll keep me informed of any updates. James hesitated for a moment, then added, If I may, sir, what you've done here, it's remarkable. Not many would go to these lengths to teach a lesson like this. Henry chuckled softly, the corners of his eyes crinkling. It's not just about the lesson, James. It's about creating a space where people feel valued, whether they're buying a truck or working behind the desk. As James walked off, Henry took a moment to reflect. His thoughts drifted back to the events that had unfolded over the past 48 hours. The dismissal, the laughter, the look on Kevin's face when the truth was revealed. He didn't relish the discomfort he'd caused, but he knew it had been necessary. People, he believed, were capable of growth, but sometimes they needed a push to see the world through a different lens. Henry's gaze turned toward the dealership's main entrance, where a family had just walked in. They looked like they'd come from hard work, perhaps a long day on a ranch or a construction site. The father's boots were dusty, the mother's shirt slightly worn, but their smiles were warm, and their children's eyes lit up at the sight of the shiny cars. Henry felt a pang of recognition. They reminded him of his own family, decades ago, struggling to make ends meet but dreaming of something better. He nodded to himself, resolved to ensure that this dealership would be a place where people like them would never be judged or dismissed. He took a deep breath and began walking toward them, a kind smile spreading across his face. "Welcome to the dealership," he said warmly. "How can we help you today?" Later that evening, as the showroom grew quieter and the staff began to leave for the day, Henry stood alone, taking it all in. He traced his fingers lightly over the hood of the F-150 Platinum, his mind filled with a mix of satisfaction and resolve. This was more than just a business for him now. It was a reminder of the values that had carried him through his life. And as he turned to leave, locking up the dealership behind him, he whispered a quiet thought to himself. Never underestimate the worth of a person, no matter how they appear. This final scene ties together Henry's quiet strength, his reflections on the importance of respect, and the transformation of the dealership's culture. Let me know if you'd like to explore another story or theme. I hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts about it. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new and equally exciting stories. See you in the next video.